My guest today comes from a family that is obsessed with playing the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
If you say his name, it is often followed by the word legato, a technique which he masters like none other. Jack Gardiner describes him as his second father. Welcome to this episode, Tom Quayle.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Really enjoying this show. It's really nice. This is my favorite show. Music Mess, Nam, all of those other shows. They're too big, too sprawling, too crazy. This one's nice and chilled out.
Yeah.
You can't get lost normally.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to play as well. And we have really nice audiences, very appreciative crowd. It's a great, really nice place to be.
For listeners, we're at the Guitar Summit here in Mannheim.
Mm-hmm.
So loads of great players here. Good opportunity.
Absolutely.
I'm thrilled to talk with you because, you are, to me, a very special player. And I just mentioned the word obsessed. So tell me, okay, your family was obsessed with playing guitar.
Yeah.
The 13, 12, 11-year-old Tom, tell me about him.
Yeah, so there we have Phil X playing in the background.
Yeah, we're going to ignore Phil.
So my entire family plays guitar. And I literally mean everybody. We're like the Von Trapps, basically. And from a very young age, I didn't actually start playing guitar until I was 15. But from a very young age, my parents ran folk clubs.
Huh.
So I had music around me the entire time. And it was very much guitar-based because folk music is generally guitars and banjos, stringed instruments. So we were taken down to this folk club on a regular basis. And we thought this was amazing in some ways and terrible in others. We thought it was amazing because we got to stay up till midnight, 1 a.m, listening to music.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the music I wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
I wasn't into it at all, even when I was younger. But now in hindsight, I absolutely love it. But my dad is a phenomenal guitar player, really amazing.
What kind of style does he master?
My dad's interesting. He's like a Tommy Emmanuel style player.
Ah.
And when I say that, what I mean is he literally plays Tommy's stuff and he transcribes it. My dad doesn't play original material. He's actually a veterinary surgeon by trade. He's retired now. He's just in his early 70s and is retired. But when he was younger, he used to do the veterinary thing and then they would gig on the side, my parents. And he would do some solo guitar stuff and then my mum would sing as well. And it was always Tommy Emmanuel, Leo Koku would be another one, Bert Jansch, that kind of style of solo fingerstyle guitar. But he's always been exceptional, technically exceptional. My dad is one of these guys, and this is probably relevant to our conversation, who excels in everything he does. So when he was younger, he renovated the houses that we're in. He would do all the work himself. He renovated barns and did all of the work, kind of cladding the walls, plastering the walls, doing the electrics. He probably wasn't supposed to, but he did.
And was his father like that as well?
No,
or
I don't
mother,
think so.
maybe?
I actually don't know where he got that from. I never met my grandmother on his side, and I very briefly met his father. But as far as I'm aware, they weren't like that. He just had this drive. Don't know where it came from, but he would renovate classic cars. He did everything, and everything he did, he excelled at, and guitar was one of those things too. And he was actually one of the first guys who ever transcribed Tommy Emmanuel stuff and put it on the internet. So he has legendary tablature transcriptions of Tommy Emmanuel stuff that still exist on the internet.
Oh, that's demanding, man.
Yeah. So the thing is, I always heard very high-level guitar playing in my house, and my dad was known around all of our friends as being the guy who all the guitar players wanted to sound like my dad because they were all fingerstyle guitar players. But I didn't start playing until I was 15. And I think I showed an interest beforehand. And my dad had a couple of electric guitars, so primarily very nice acoustic guitars. And I didn't really show that much interest in those. But he had a Flying V, not what you'd expect at all, and a very strange Gibson SG2, which was an all black. It looked like Batman's guitar, basically. It was an all black guitar with mini humbuckers in and a very strange switching system where you would switch the pickups on and off.
And those were in your house?
Yeah, so they're in the house.
It's really late at 15 only to discover.
This is it. So I think I did mess around with guitars before that, but that was just because they were around the house. I never actually did anything practice-wise with them. I didn't study anything. I didn't actually play them properly. In fact, if I remember rightly, I would lay them down in my lap, even at the age of sort of 12, 13, not really wanting to play them, but just interested in them. I thought they looked cool, and I thought the electrics looked amazing. He very rarely played them, so they were always available to pick up and kind of mess around with. But at the age of 15, I showed a big interest, and I was getting into power chord punk bands like the Wild Hearts, probably. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but an English punk band who are really great, but they had the offensive lyrics that I was looking for as a 15-year-old rebelling. And my dad actually bought me an Ibanez RG I think it was a 470.
Oh, yeah.
And before that, there'd been what they called a Marlin Slammer kicking around, which was a bright yellow Strat that I had for a very short period of time. And again, my dad stripped the paint off the guitar and we kind of refinished it and stuff. So it was more about the aesthetics of it. I didn't really play it properly and I couldn't play it. But then he got me the Ibanez. And I thought this was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. He very sneakily came home with it one day because I'd shown an interest in it in our local music shop as he was looking for an acoustic probably. Didn't know anything about Ibanez at the time, but I thought this guitar looked incredible. But the thing that he did that was really amazing is he realized that there was no way that he was going to be able to teach me. We tried a few times and clashed on this.
Oh, yeah?
My dad and I get on incredibly well. And now we can talk about guitar perfectly. But at the time, his playing was the antithesis of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Don't know why. I can't put my finger on exactly why.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
That you get along.
Yep.
You're in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
You both love music.
Yeah.
And that's the one particular thing that you can't do together.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, we actually did end up playing a little bit together. We can talk about that later if you want, in terms of that short experience of gigging together a little bit. And he played on my jazz college audition as well, which he was very nervous for because he's not a jazzer at all. But back in the day, he brought this Ibanez home, and then he brought a copy of Guitar Techniques magazine home as well, because he thought, I'm not going to be able to teach you. You're obviously not responding to what I'm showing you. So he brought this magazine home, and it had a CD on the front cover, which basically went through, there were some guys who used to teach there who were quite famous. Guthrie Govan was on there, and Dave Kilminster, who plays for Roger Waters now, and Phil Hilborn, who's a big kind of British guitar player, all very high-level educators. And they were teaching Steve Vai. There was Metallica in there as well. People who I are aware of on the periphery, but had never tried to play any of their material. And I literally overnight became obsessed.
Yeah.
And I went from playing some power chord stuff because he'd shown me some basic power chords and I was into that. And we had a Marshall valve state. I can't remember, it was 8080, I think was the model.
Oh, yeah.
And because I was telling you about renovating the houses, we had this barn attached to the house that was completely derelict and empty. And we had no neighbours. We actually lived near the local airport, Leeds Bradford Airport. And I think at times I was louder than the planes because we used to sit this amplifier in the barn and I could turn it all the way up.
So you had a louder than planes button.
Yeah, the louder than planes button, exactly. Yeah. It's louder than a jet engine. And I used to sit and play. And what I would do is I would put the albums on and I would try and play along with the albums. And I couldn't do it with Steve Vai, obviously, at the time. But I could play the Metallica riffs fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And then this obsession thing, I became so obsessed and I became the cliche. I would practice 7-8 hours a day as between the ages of 15 and 17. So that 2-year period was very, very intense from a technical perspective. And in the middle of that period, after about a year, I could play all the Passion and Warfare, Steve Vai stuff, a couple of Joe Satriani albums, and I got into Dream Theater. Big cliche, that's what we did at the time. That's my generation.
We're about the same age, I think.
Right.
You're now what age?
44, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm 45. So
yeah, so that was my generation, our generation. That was a lot of guys I talked to. They had a very similar experience. They would learn that way. They would get the tablature books and they would learn from the CD. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just learned the tablature and played. But it was all I could think about, and my life transformed at the age of 15.
But you said overnight. Can you go back to that moment? Do you really remember the moment?
No, I remember some specific moments that are related to it, but I don't remember developing the obsession with it. Moments that I do remember are based around specific songs that I remember never having a feeling like that before, where, I mean, again, this is a cliche for someone of my generation or our generation. If you're from my guitar background, which was the shred guitar background originally, other than the power chord phase, I heard the album Images and Words by Dream Theater. Now, I don't listen to Dream Theater anymore, but at the time it was my absolute, again, obsession. And I used to play this song, Under a Glass Moon, to everybody who came to the house. Even my parents' folk musician friends who could not care less about this terrible, as far as they was concerned, music. I thought, everybody, you've got to understand this. This is incredible. It's the greatest thing you will ever hear. And I genuinely, I can feel the hairs on my arms standing up when I think about it now. I can summon back that feeling. And I just remember thinking, I have to be able to do this.
But it's something sweet, but also because at that age, I think it's very important to achieve, and this feeling like, oh, I can do this. That that's probably what, or did that feeling draw you as well? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive sense of Dunning-Kruger involved with this whole thing, that you don't know how difficult this potentially is.
yeah,
So you don't have the fear. And as you get older, like now, if I had to learn, let's say we're at this guitar summit, tomorrow someone says to me, you've got to jam with such and such a person. Let's say today Martin and I jammed with Yannick Gwizdala.
Yeah.
And they said, we happened to play a tune that I knew quite well, although I did read the changes. But someone said, you've got to learn this really complicated tune. Immediately, the first thing that would happen to me is the fear would kick in of, okay, what could possibly go wrong? I've got to learn that. I've got to do a good job. I'm playing with Yannick, so this is scary. You know, I've got to sound good. It's my one opportunity to sound good. And as an adult, I think those things can creep into your psyche. But as a 15-year-old, they don't exist.
But that's super interesting, because in life, you tend to think, okay, it goes in a straight line. You learn more and more and more. But some things you have to unlearn actually then, right?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it's experience-based as well. So the Dunning-Kruger kind of flips over at some point where you don't know what you don't know when you're 15. And so you are in this experience bubble of, well, how hard can this possibly be? I love this, therefore I'm just going to do it. And you don't know how difficult it is. So you just proceed down the path. And the experience teaches you, oh, actually, this is quite hard, but I'm really enjoying it, because at that age, you're making enormous leaps and strides in progress very quickly.
Yeah.
If you put in the work in, which I was. And this is the key, actually. It never, ever, ever felt like work. Not once. It never, I didn't think I was practicing. I was just having the time of my life, playing all the time, desperate to be able to play the music that I was obsessed with. But then as an adult, when you've gone through that process, especially coming out of jazz college, and I'm skipping ahead here a bit, but it's the same psyche, just on a different, it's flipped over now. You come out and you realize, I've got to a certain point now, and to make progress requires huge amounts of practice and huge amounts of effort to make tiny movements. And you're more aware of how much progress you're making as well.
Yeah.
So for me, some of the fear starts creeping in, the doubt, and, you know, you start to compare yourself. At the age of 15, you're comparing yourself to your heroes, and you know exactly what the end goal is. Even if in reality you don't, you think you do. I just want to play Under a Glass Moon. It's in some ways, it's an incredibly complex goal, but it's also an incredibly simple goal because it has a very finite end. Can I play Under a Glass Moon from start to finish, all the notes in the right order? There's no nuance involved. You're not expressing yourself. It's a very simple goal with complex internals, but it's a simple goal of, can I play it from the first note to the last note all the way through correctly? Yeah. And that
but it's not a question of what do I want to say as a person.
Yeah. And there's where, not just that, but in terms of comparing yourself to others, the self-doubt can come in. Not that I have a problem with self-doubt now, but, you know, that progress becomes harder to make because you're judging yourself much more harshly, and you're judging yourself based around other people, and it's got worse. I mean, we could go on about Instagram and all sorts, but life has changed dramatically for musicians over the last sort of 10 years.
But back then, when the obsession dropped, so to say, your parents, your father recognized this, like, okay, he has my DNA in doing things in obsessive way.
Yeah, we had some interesting things happen. So between the age of 15 and 16, now I might be getting the timeline ever so slightly wrong here, but it's the period between 15 to 17, and then just before going to university, around 18, I was supposed to, but there's another story around that we can go through. But I've been playing for about a year and a half, and my dad went to Music Ground, which is our local guitar store in Leeds, and he said, my son needs a teacher. I don't have a teacher for him, and he's been learning lots from magazines, but I think we need a teacher now. You know, he's started to take it very seriously. Who can you recommend? And they recommended this guy who was quite a way away, because he was the only guy they thought, okay, well, he's the local like guitar hero. He's going to help Tom out. And we went to see him, and my dad drove a very long way to get there, and we arrived. And unfortunately, I could play better than the guy. At the moment I sat down, like I played, there's this guy, Scott Mishu. Now, I can't play this anymore, but there was this Scott Mishu, like crazy fast shredding legato thing with a bunch of tapping and stuff in. And I played this for this guitar teacher, and he was like, okay. Well,
Can I take a lesson from you? And he asked.
It was a very strange experience for me, very weird. I felt very embarrassed and awkward about it, and my dad didn't really know what to make of it either. So I think I sat with this guy who went over there 2 or 3 times, and he wrote out some scales and stuff, because I didn't really know what I was doing at that point. So he could show me some of that stuff. But But my parents realized very quickly that I was taking this very seriously. I mean, if your kid is doing something for 7 or 8 hours a day, depending on what it is, of course, in this instance, it was something that they already had a lot of experience with, and they knew. I mean, my mum's a poet. That's what she does for a living. She was a housewife and a poet. So it's not a family, or despite my dad being a veterinary surgeon, if I'd have turned around and said, I want to be a writer or a poet or whatever, well, you're into hypocrite territory if they start going, you can't do that. No. You need to go and, and the last thing, my parents are hypocrites. They're wonderful people. So they knew straight away. And of course, they were very sensible. They said, well, maybe have a backup plan just in case. All the usual things, but they allowed me to do that and go down that road, which is, fantastic. I'm very lucky in that regard.
And so then after a while you started studying also. Can you tell me something about that process of when did that relatively simple goal change and become into something like, okay, it's my personality in there, and thus it needs personality building also.
Yeah, I mean that was actually a lot later. So we did eventually find a guitar teacher, and primarily, actually, he wasn't really teaching me guitar. What he was teaching me was the theory side of things I needed to go and study. So I think at the age of 17, I was like, okay, I want to do this at university. I want to go and study this. This is what I want to do for my life, making big decisions as a young, teenager. And we had to find somebody who could teach me theory up to the standard required to get into jazz college. So we found a guy called Graham Young, who fantastic guitar player, really great piano player, and he taught me a lot of classical theory and then a lot of jazz theory as well to get me up to that point. And also, he's the reason I tune in fourths as well, because he tuned in fourths, and I was a very impressionable.
So for the people who you tune up the second high, the B and the E string.
Correct. Right? So they're up a semitone. So the guitar becomes all fourths as opposed to the major third between the G and the B string.
Oh, so he what did he say? Try this out, or you should do it like this, or?
Yeah, well, he wasn't sort of a slightly irresponsible thing to do to tell an impressionable person to change the tuning of the guitar. But I did it because I kind of hero worshipped him at the time, because he kind of sounded the way I thought I wanted to sound. And of course he had all the knowledge I wanted. So he was the guy who was distilling all of this information that was making me progress as a musician. So I thought he was fantastic. So I changed to fourths tuning under his influence, if you like. And he may have tried to deter me from doing it. I don't remember. But I did it anyway, and it ended up being a very valuable thing. But he took me through that process and I got into jazz college and studied for 3 years, which is an entirely different conversation as to how that went.
Well, tell me briefly.
Yeah, well, what it felt like was I went to Leeds College of Music. Yeah. It was a proper conservatoire back then. Now it's not really so much. They do a whole range of different things. I don't really know too much about the school anymore, but it's certainly not what it used to be. And the jazz course was very well respected, and they had great teachers on it back then. But I didn't really get good tuition from there. I wasn't taught a great deal. It wasn't well structured. I went in with a lot more knowledge than some of the other guys, and therefore I was like, why am I learning this information that I already know? There were a bunch of people on the course who couldn't really play, so I was wondering, why are they here or why am I here? I wasn't sure which way around it was working. And then over the course of the first 2 years, I didn't feel like I learned anything, but of course had a huge amount of time just to practice. So did a lot of practice and developing, changes playing, fretboard visualization, time feel, all that kind of stuff, did some gigs, whatever. And then in the second year, in the summer between the second and third year, I had a bunch of lessons with a guy who was, I think he'd graduated the year after, an amazing guitar player called Tom Quayle, who lives in Paris now. Really insane jazz guitar player. He should be far more well known than he is. And he showed me a bunch of actually what is very simple stuff, actually, but hadn't been distilled properly via the course, which was major and minor 2-5-1s and how to approach them harmonically, what you can and can't do, some melodic minor harmony that I could hear but wasn't aware of what was happening, that should have been taught over the first 2 years but wasn't. So by the time I went into my third year, I was a much better player in terms of language and in terms of knowledge harmonically. And I could find this stuff on the fretboard fairly quickly because the tuning being symmetrical, it was quite easy to find this stuff. So I went into the third year and became obsessed again with Kenny Wheeler, with Wayne Shorter, these kind of composers.
Oh, yeah.
played a lot of quite complex tunes and became really utterly obsessed with harmony, totally obsessed with harmony and playing through changes.
It's funny that because you can become obsessed with playing the guitar, but it's a door that opens that has so many doors behind it, with which you can get obsessed with.
Yeah, well, this is something I heard Wayne Krantz say many years ago. He says, you know, learning music of any description is, like you've just said, you open the door called guitar, and there's 50,000 other doors there, and you pick one and you go, right, let's go through that door, and you have to be obsessed with that door for that time, and that door might be harmony, and you open that door, there's your melodic minor scale mode. So you pick one, you pick Lydian dominant, you go through that door, and it's like, oh boy, triad pairs. Okay, now let's do triad pairs, and it's like there's so much stuff.
And some doors go all over it, like a legato technique, so to say.
Can you overarching thing?
Yeah, overarching. Sometimes my English.
No, your English is amazing.
but can you tell me something about finding or realizing this is the way that feels good to me to play?
Yeah, I mean, so this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. So when I'd graduated, I'd sort of had this kind of hybrid, not hybrid right hand, but hybrid like legato picking technique that was more like a Pat Metheny style technique. And that was due to a severe flaw in my picking technique, because when I was 15, 16, 17, I didn't practice the way I should have done. I didn't have a teacher. So I built a lot of tension into my right hand. And I also built, this is very geeky guitar material now, but it's important for the story. So when I crossed over to a new string with a downstroke, I built in a little flick in my wrist. Not on purpose. It was just because I didn't know how to practice. I had no one guiding me. And my dad didn't play this way. He was a fingerstyle guitar player. So now I still have that in my wrist and I can't get rid of it. I mean, I could, but it would take years of undoing that technique. So I always had a frustration technically where if I was trying to execute something, I'd come off a gig or I'd come off a jam with somebody and I was frustrated with my technique because it would always let me down.
But did it hurt, or you're just not able to play it?
I'm hugely lucky. I have never had any pain at all. Again, maybe a slightly different conversation, but I've had ulnar nerve compression, which I still have. So I've lost some of the use of my but the strength of my third and pinky finger, little finger. But never had any pain, thankfully, ever in my playing, because I don't have a particularly hard style. So because of this, I came out of jazz college and did I graduated in 2002 and had 4 years of struggling to fit myself into who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? What's my sound? I wanted to be a great jazz guitar player. I had visions of being the next Kurt Rosenwinkel. Completely crazy. You know, you have this mindset when you come out of jazz college. You go through the production line and everybody assumes they're going to make it. And of course, very, very few do. And I think you can get locked in this mindset of either feeling like a failed musician or I'm going to do something else, you know.
That's an interesting moment. I can imagine finishing college, which is kind of a playing ground as well, right? Not much responsibility. And then you go out of college and like your career starts. So tell me something about that phase. You just said, okay, I wanted to be the new Kurt Rosenwinkel. But at the same time, I don't know, you had to pay rent or whatever. So what did you do?
You've had this luxury of 3-4 years of doing nothing but playing guitar, networking, you know, going to gigs, maybe doing the odd, you know, we had to do a dissertation, the odd essay, whatever. But primarily your focus is entirely on guitar. Like you said, no responsibilities. You're not paying any tax. There's nothing to do in that regard, in the UK anyway. Then suddenly you have to find something to do to pay rent. You know, no one's giving you a loan anymore. That's it. And of course, now in the UK, you come out and you've paid £40,000. Not back then when I graduated, but now these jazz guys are coming out with 40, 50, 60,000 pounds worth of debt.
Same in the Netherlands.
Terrifying. So you've got to start earning money. So what everyone does is they start teaching, or they start doing some residency gigs, or the usual stuff that everybody gets into. And I felt like I couldn't see light at the end of the tunnel. And so many people were going and doing different things. They weren't working in, you know, they weren't playing, or if they were doing the odd gig here and there where they were really struggling for money. And I couldn't afford my phone bill. I couldn't buy nice food. I lived in a fairly nasty flat, you know, or a house, but with shared house. I wasn't moving forward in my life at all. And I was teaching in the local college, for example, all that kind of thing. And then again, these key moments in your life. I had a student from Chicago who happened to be in Leeds. And he was studying, I can't remember what he was studying, but it was nothing, I think it was business, but he was a guitar player. And he'd come to me for lessons. and he brought along Greg Howe's Extraction album.
Oh.
And I was in jazz world. I was in like blinkered jazz world. I had the kind of horse blinkers on and like 251s, 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 all the language, that kind of thing. But again, very frustrated with my playing and with my technique. And I put Extraction on. And I was very aware of Greg Howe from back in the days when I was shredding as a shredder. I didn't know he was a fusion guitar player. And we listened to Extraction and my mind just melted. And this is rare. People don't normally go from jazz, like what they think it's back to fusion. You know, fusion guitar player? No.
Yeah.
Listen to Adam Rogers or listen to Kurt Rosenwinkel or Jonathan Kreisberg. Why are you listening to Greg Howe? I loved it. And so I started in around 2006 to try and emulate some of that sound with legato playing.
Yeah.
And because I was much more mature in terms of my practice, having gone through jazz college and understanding how to practice and not build intention and relax, so on and so forth, and what good technique actually was, it allowed me to develop this technique in a much more nuanced and useful way. And the other thing is, it came incredibly easily. Whereas picking was always a major struggle and I was always frustrated. With legato, it was almost within the space of 6 months, this thing had started to form. And I had this advantage now of knowing the fretboard well. And this was my frustration. I knew the fretboard, I had good time feel, but I couldn't execute what I wanted to play with my right hand. Suddenly I found I could start to execute and play through changes and play long lines. And at first the technique wasn't there. And there's early YouTube videos from 2007 where you can watch me improvising. I set the camera rolling just like this and just played. Because back in the day, you could do that and no one cared. It didn't have to be this crazy.
I'm going to watch this, man.
Yeah, there's early ones. Check out the very early ones. And I get halfway through a line and it dies because I can't. My brain can't keep up with my fingers. I've got more technique than I have the ability to find my way through the fretboard.
Wow. Yeah.
And then without thinking too hard about it, I didn't have a process for it. I just played a lot and used this technique and it gradually came together. It started to formulate into a thing. And then I suddenly realized that people were getting very interested in it online. I was uploading these videos, not actually for any other purpose than there were some friends of mine. So Martin Miller, who I'm playing with at the moment, Andy Wood, who's here as well. We all were on this forum online, the John Petrucci forum from our Dream Theater days. We all used to hang out on this forum. We'd upload videos for each other. This is what I'm working on at the moment. And we'd have Rick Graham would do some crazy picking thing. Andy would do some crazy picking thing. Martin would do some crazy picking thing. And I'd be like, well, here's a legato thing. And then suddenly people started getting really interested in it. And I think it was unusual because it was legato technique, very time field based, very subdivision based, but through complex chord changes.
But that's important. The timing is important, right? It needs to both really roll, but not become like a bucket of water that you empty, right?
Yeah. So whenever I describe this in masterclasses or when I'm teaching, whatever, I describe there's two different ways of doing it. There's like and neither is better or worse than the other. It's just two distinct territories of legato playing, if you like. And there's the kind of rock-based Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Paul Gilbert, Dream Theater, John Petrucci version, which is not subdivision-based. It's basically speed textural kind of thing. And Joe Satriani describes it as it's a great description, like a ball of liquid mercury rolling around in his hand. It never stops. It doesn't sit on a particular subdivision or time. But it's a beautiful textural sound. And then you've got the guys who want to basically be saxophone players. And they've got this dagga, 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 or swung 16ths or swung 8ths, whatever. But through harmony and outlining changes with it. So it's a different thing entirely. And that then became my new obsession. And of course, when you have the positive feedback loop of people being interested in it too, and they're complimenting what you're doing and they're saying, oh, this is really cool, So that then feeds back in. And because I was finding it easier from a technical perspective, or easier than anything I'd done up to this point, it became my thing. And it has, again, consider myself very, very lucky in this regard. It's developed into a sound. And people seem to like that sound and it seems to be identifiable. And at no point did I do that on purpose at all. I never set out with the idea of this is going to be my sound. I'm going to pick legato. I'm going to pluck it out the air and that's going to be my thing. And I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to have this tone. It just all organically formed. And I don't know why. I don't feel like I was in control of it.
Do you think that's the only way in which it will really work in a healthy way, so to say? Like, because if you do it that strictly, then already know where you want to go, and that's a different thing than just letting it enter, and you'll see what happens, right?
I think a lot of the people who I've listened to who do have very identifiable sounds, and in my world, that is more legato things. So guys like Brett Garsed, Alan Hines is another example, guys I can pick out immediately.
Yeah.
Jonathan Kreisberg is another one, although he's not a legato player. His sound and the way he plays and his lines immediately stand out. Pat Metheny's another one. I don't think any of those guys set out with the idea of as a kind of concrete, like the goal we said about learning to play under a vast moon from start to finish, a very concrete, simple goal with complexity in the middle, but it's a simple goal. I don't think anyone sets out with the simple goal of, I'm going to have my own sound.
Yeah.
Because that's a horrendous, how would you even, I don't know how you would structure that. I don't know what you would do. It has to happen organically.
What does that even mean? Because I have to have my own sound. Basically every note you play is your own sound.
Yeah,
right?
Of course, yeah.
At that moment.
It can't not be, can it?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there is this thing, it's kind of logical that everybody is their own unique amalgamation of their own influences and their own, experience and nature and nurture and so on and so forth. So you can't not be your own sound.
Yeah.
But of course, you can clone yourself to sound like somebody else.
Yes.
Or you can be unoriginal. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can play in a top 40 band and you can play perfectly good improvised solos and not be original and be a great guitar player. And certainly from my point of view, I did not set out to be original or have my own sound. But fortunately, ended up in a position where people tell me that I have a thing that they can recognize as being mine, which is this particular legato sound, whatever that is. I don't know,
But earlier on, you told a little bit about the struggle. Like I was teaching in a school, which must have been a love-hate relationship with teaching.
Absolutely.
Jack Gardiner told me what he meant of what you meant for him as a teacher. He said he's my second father, and he said that jokingly, but what he said that really struck me is like one particular example. He said I didn't have any money to buy a computer and have Logic installed, and you just told him, yeah, you can have my old one. So that's more than just being a teacher, right? That's being someone who gives somebody a push in life, right?
Yeah.
Was that the way in which you needed to approach teaching? That it made it fulfilling for yourself as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've always found teaching really fulfilling. One of my favorite jobs I ever had was I used to work for Yamaha, and they have music schools all around the world, and in the UK it's no different. And I used to teach 8-year-old to 12-year-old kids in this music school, and we teach them in groups, and it was amazing watching their eyeballs go really wide when you'd play something they recognized and they felt like they wanted to do it on the guitar. But then you sometimes get very special people coming to you for lessons, and I've had a few of those, been lucky again. Jack's one of them. Just extraordinary talent. I mean, I have hours and hours of video footage of me and Jack and Rick Graham jamming in my flat. I used to have a flat in a place called Saltaire. And it was this lovely triple aspect window, beautiful light coming in, and we'd sit on the sofas and just jam for hours and hours. And I have all this footage. Jack's 17 and he sounds extraordinary. So, to be in the position where you can help him develop as a player is unbelievable, to see what he can do now. And again, I've had a couple of these guys. So another one of mine was George Marios, who is actually not that many people know George, but he is one of the most extraordinary guitar players I've ever heard in my entire life. So to have these guys and be able to push their development a little bit further forwards and to help them out and so on and so forth is incredible,
What do you learn from that process yourself? Because teaching also teaches yourself, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, just from a pure knowledge base, often you're not, so say the legato thing or the playing through changes or learning the fretboard, while I was doing it, I didn't necessarily think too hard about the process of it. I didn't have this procedural thing where I said, if I do X, followed by Y, followed by Z, so on and so forth, I will get to the point I need to be at. It wasn't that laid out. You just become obsessed and go through the process, and the obsession lends itself to allowing you to develop the knowledge or the skills because you don't care how long it takes, you just obsess, so you keep doing it. But when you teach it, you have to go back in hindsight and say, like a post hoc thing, how did I do that? Yes. And how can I explain it procedurally to somebody else?
And you enter a new level, right, of consciousness.
You're not aware at the time of how it worked. You just do it, and then you get it to the end result. And you're sort of aware of some bits of it. You remember what you practiced, but of course you're kind of experimenting, especially if you're creating something, that is maybe a bit more original or new or whatever. I mean, it's not new, obviously. Nothing I do is new, but people are interested in it. So then going back and teaching that stuff to Jack is really interesting, because you have to have this procedural, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. How do I get them from A to Z, So that was when you start developing a system of saying, now I can explain this to somebody else, and I can say, you just follow this procedure and hopefully that's the outcome if you put the work in. So now I have ways of teaching legato, ways of teaching fretboard visualization, ways of teaching time feel that, I couldn't have explained prior to teaching those high-level students in a logical way, but now I can.
But so, do you feel that process helps you master the technique even better?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think my playing was at its highest peak when I was teaching people like Jack. So before my daughter was born, 2016, there was a period between 2013 and 2016, let's say, where I was doing a lot of that kind of teaching to guys like Jack, George, Luke Lewis, Luke works with Martin on various projects now, amazing guitar player. I was doing a lot of high-level teaching, and I think at that point my playing was probably the best it's ever been, both physically and mentally, like the speed of processing information. Because of course, you're showing someone else how to do it, so you're hyper aware of all of those things all the time. And the same thing goes for when I used to work for Lick Library. I did a Steely Dan DVD where I had to learn, transcribe and teach, I think it was 7 Steely Dan songs, make all the backing tracks for it, get the tones correct. So you're hyper laser focused onto specific aspects of guitar playing that I would never normally do. And I remember coming out of that project and I was like, wow, my hands feel like better than they've ever felt. And my brain is really laser focused and my ears are really focused. And if you're working on high level stuff like that, obviously it ends up that you come out that process more switched on, Yeah. Whereas now I don't get much sleep and, it's like I don't get to practice very much. So I'm not that hyper focused or switched on, but that's life.
That happens to us 40 somethings.
Yeah, exactly. Priorities shift. So.
Hey, when I first heard you play, it was on YouTube like many others. And then I went, let's check out some albums by this guy.
Yeah.
And then I was like, huh?
There isn't anything.
No,
it's just tumbleweed. Yeah.
But tell me, has that been, or why is that? Let me ask it like that.
I mean, this actually it's not now, by the way, but this actually used to be something I was very uncomfortable talking about because it felt like a flaw. And it is in a way, it is a flaw because I would love to be in the position where I could say, album number 7's coming out very soon. But writing has never been a simple thing to me. It's been a very complex fight to write music for me. I was always obsessed with improvisation, still am. That's my kind of viewpoint on things. So I came from the world of head solos, jazz lead sheets. That's what I studied. And that's what I never had a big period of being into bands. It's interesting. Martin Miller and I have this conversation all the time. He grew up into bands. He was into Deep Purple. He was into Pink Floyd. He was into bands, not guitar players. And I grew up into guitar players who weren't necessarily always playing in bands, but they were writing music, obviously, but it was very guitar-based music. And then very quickly pivoted into jazz, where it's all about the soloist. And the standard is the vehicle for the solo, for the improvisation. And that became my focus. And I wanted to play through chord changes really well. I wanted to understand harmony really well, have good time feel, so on and so forth, and have a sound as a soloist. So my experience level with writing and production and mixing and all of this kind of stuff that guitar players have to be able to do these days never really developed. So coming back to the obsession, I didn't get obsessed with that stuff. And then I found myself in the position where I was forced to write because I had to for my degree. And I found it hard. I didn't find it easy. I didn't find it fulfilling. I don't have this deep-seated need that some people like Martin and I talk about this, Martin Miller, we talk about this all the time. If he doesn't write, something's wrong. He has to write. He has to get this thing out of him. And I don't have that need in myself.
But it takes, I can imagine, because that's not what a lot of people will expect from a guitar player, right?
Exactly.
So what did it take to kind of accept that? Like, okay, that's not me.
Some pain, actually, some fraud, what's it called? Imposter syndrome. some sleepless nights. I'll be totally honest about it. Some, real worry that, okay, well, this is the thing now. I'm in the position where, because things start happening in your career, people start taking notice, and you end up like, I'm traveling the world doing masterclasses and clinics, and I'm, Ibanez signature guitar deals with Laney, signature Wampler pedal. There's people who are really interested in what I'm playing, and they're listening to all the content, and they can't go and buy an album. And I've played on other albums. I've played on other people's albums, and I have released, an album with Alessandro Benvenuti and Marcus Fogli. We did a great album together, but I've not released my own album. And in a way, I've kind of come to peace with this idea that I've made a contribution in a different way. So, that this whole sound that I have, people tell me, I would never say this, but people tell me it's been very influential. And there's a whole sort of army of guitar players who are influenced by what I've done technically and the sound. And then they've all bought the tuition material. They're into the kind of way I'm teaching. I've released the solo app. I've made a contribution there that's different. And I think I've learned where my contribution is and where I sit within whatever this thing is that we're all doing. And at the age of 44, I'm okay with it. I wasn't for a very long time.
And is there somebody who helped you in this process of accepting?
Well, many conversations, this whole thing I was saying before about the contribution and what people like about what you do and why people value it, so on and so forth. People have said this to me. It's not something I've generated in my own head. That would be an incredibly awful narcissistic move to say these things. People have said this to me. So sometimes you have to be able to take on board the nice things that people say to you, and not become this kind of emotional shield and say, no, I'm going to let the imposter syndrome win. That's a hard battle to win. But I'm at the point now where I've had enough of this that people have said, no, don't be crazy. This is like, people would love an album, but you've contributed in a different way. It's not nothing. There's stuff out there that people can, there's a lot of playing out there, and there's a lot of tuition material, and you've contributed something to the guitar community, and people like it and they appreciate it. It would be amazing if you released an album. Obviously, that would be great. And I'm never say never. I have a bunch of tunes. I mean, when I do these clinics and masterclasses, I play my own tunes, but I just don't have this confidence and desire to release an album in the same way that, say, Mark Lettieri's on his like 7th or 8th solo album. I'm not that guy.
But you say, that's what intrigues me, is that you say, I don't have the confidence and desire. Desire, I think, okay.
Yeah.
But the confidence, that triggers me a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, these days, I think it's become even harder, because what used to happen is you'd go in the studio with a band, and of course you could still do this, of course. You go in the studio with a band with a bunch of lead sheets, and you all just do your thing, and then you release the album and it's all improvised, and it is what it is. But now the production level, the level of mixing, just the whole thing has become so incredibly high end. Wow. From a single person, an artist just releases something, and it's like they've done all the mixing, they've done all the engineering, they've done everything. They've like, the skill set required is so crazy that, again, the imposter syndrome starts to come back up, and it's like, I don't have that skill set.
So it's other people that you compare yourself with.
Well, I mean, always, it's always the way. I mean, it's like now I'm very lucky. I don't suffer from depression, never have. I could see how, if you are somebody in the guitar industry who's sort of got a following, who does have propensity to have, to have depressive, tendencies, how you'd never want to do anything, because the way, I've limited myself to 30 minutes of Instagram every day, and then my iPhone just says, nope, sorry, you've had enough. That's done.
Oh, I should do that too.
Yeah. It's the best thing ever. In fact, the best thing ever is to delete the app entirely. Same with Twitter, same with Facebook, everything. But of course, modern musicians can't do that. You've got to upload every now and again. Otherwise, we have this thing in our head where we just disappear and nobody knows who we were. Your legacy's disappeared. Nobody's ever going to be interested again unless you upload a video now. It's a weird feeling. But this is the truth of 2024. You are constantly comparing yourself to other people, even in the back of your mind when you're not what they call doom scrolling through Instagram. So of course you're always going, that guy's just released an album. Listen to it. How amazing. Listen to the production. Listen to all the bells and whistles going on in the production. How have they developed this skill set? And then you find out they did it themselves, and you're like, what? How is this even possible? I don't have any of this skill set. But it's the old thing of, you just have to accept what you can do and what you're good at, and where you sit in the grand scheme of things. I don't mean in terms of hierarchy, but just what your contribution is.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about the hierarchy. Like I learned the lesson very quickly, the very painful lesson coming back to wanting to be a New York jazz guitar player. I was never going to be that guy. Just wasn't good enough. That's just the bottom line of it. I wasn't good enough to ever be the next Jonathan Kreitberg, no matter how hard that dream existed in my brain. That's never going to happen. And that acceptance of that was very painful, but that acceptance was a good learning experience. That this is, you've got to learn where you are in, not the hierarchy, but just, where your contribution is, and be okay with it. It's just one of those things. You've got to accept what you are and not fight it, because you can fight it in terms of wanting to be better, but there is always going to be a ceiling where I just cannot be that person. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much work I put in, it's not going to happen. And that's a healthy realization for your own mental health.
Okay, there's two things I'd like to ask. First, I'd like to add to all those people, I just really enjoy listening what you play.
Thank you.
So it's a thrill listening to it. That's cool. Before I ask the two last things, because at one point, while we were walking towards these microphones, you were telling, somebody in my family was a pole vault jumper.
Yeah, a high jumper,
High jumper.
Yeah.
Who was that?
So my uncle was a guy called Jeff Parsons. He's my mum's brother. And he was in the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games as a British high jumper.
Because what interested me, you were saying like reaching a new level. Pole vault is the sport where you put 1 centimeter and it becomes more difficult and even more and still there's a guy, Duplantis, who's doing it right now.
Yeah, this is it.
Did you ever thought of that process that he must have had while growing in the guitar?
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, what they do is far more cruel than what we do, because we allow ourselves to, quite rightly, play up until there's no stop on this apart from the physical aspect of it. But I think the process is very similar up to a point, because you become obsessed. You realize you've got some skill in that area. Those two things combine. Usually you've got some talent, then the obsession arrives. And so you work and you train and you get really, really good at something. And you realize, actually, this could be a thing. And people start, in his case, a lot of adulation came his way because he was exceptionally good at this. And he started winning medals. And so you've got people saying to you, oh, this is fantastic. How fantastic you are, Jeff Parsons. This is amazing. Keep going, keep going. This is brilliant. People give you deals, so on and so forth. And then the cruelty of athletics is you get to late 20s, early 30s, and it's over, done like that.
And the cruelty is there's one winner.
There's only one winner. Yeah. And it is a literal qualitative thing of you came second, you came third, you came fourth. What was your height? What did you get to? Did you beat your personal best? And you see this enormous progression, and then the physical body lets you down, and you start to see this.
Specifically with pole vault, I can imagine, because if you run the 100 meters, at least you cross the line.
Yeah.
But with pole vault, the stick just drops.
Yeah.
Like a metaphor saying you failed.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely. Like I say, he wasn't actually pole vaulting; he was high jumping.
Oh, high jump. Sorry.
That's fine.
But it's still
the same thing.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. So, you smash into that pole, it goes flying off,
Fail.
and then you have to walk off, and it's a cruel thing. And music is a little bit more forgiving in that regard, because you can continue to develop. As a
who
musician
loses in music, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a competition. But the initial process was quite interesting to watch, because it's again this thing of, oh, here's the thing I discovered I'm quite good at.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see where this goes. And then the obsession comes in. And of course, to be an athlete, you have to have the obsession, because the amount of training you do, again, is directly proportional to the end result. It's not like music, really, where somebody might be born with amazing ears, pick up a guitar and go, oh, I can hear my way around this instrument, really well. You've got to train, there's no way around it. So I found that process very interesting. But luckily, he now does something completely unrelated. He runs a business that's completely unrelated, because his career obviously comes to a slightly cruel end, but we get to continue doing what we do.
Luckily.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Hey, final question before we wrap this up. What are you obsessed with now?
I am obsessed with... Okay, so let me start with the negative. I'll be honest and say I'm no longer obsessed with guitar. it's a job. So now I love playing, but I'm not obsessed with it in the way I used to be. I'd say my current obsession, and this is terrible, is synthesizers.
Ah.
That's my sound design stuff. Not anything to do with music. It's not like, oh, now I'm stopping playing guitar and I'm going to do sound design. I'm going to release some EDM music. It's not that. It's my hobby. I just love analog synthesizers. I'm totally obsessed with them. Absolutely. I've spent way too much money on them. It's terrible, terrible obsession, expensive obsession. But I love that. I absolutely love it.
I heard Ben Folds talking about this once, about analog synthesizers. He has the same obsession. You know Ben Folds, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's expensive, he said.
You will find there's a lot of people who get obsessed with this particular thing.
But any chance you might at one point think, okay, it's a hobby, but I'm good to go to release something?
Well, I'll never say never. I mean, there's a lot of, one of my favorite bands is the Midnight. It's like my guilty pleasure band. They're absolutely fantastic. Love them. And, there's a band with some amazing synths and some great guitar solos as well. So there's no reason. I mean, history allows that combination to work really well. So who knows? It might be the avenue I go down.
Hey, time flew by, Tom. Thanks so much for this conversation. And
thank you.
Listeners, thanks for listening.